Hi, everyone, and welcome to Thursdays at the Museum. I'm Amanda Harrison, a Community Engagement Manager with the Detroit Institute of Arts. Thank you so much for your patience as we're getting started a little bit later than usual, but we have an extra special presentation for you. This is all about women photographers, and it's the second part in a two-part series. We have docent Cindy Patrick and Tana Jenkins speaking with us today about the work in the collection. During the program, as always, we want to encourage you to please ask questions. Christine Mark, our manager of volunteer development, is here to take those questions to our docents. So you can leave a question by leaving a public comment on this Facebook post or a comment on the YouTube page. If you're on YouTube watching, you need to be logged in using your Gmail account. So without further ado, let's get started. Please welcome Cindy and Tana. Hi, ladies. Thanks for being here.
Hi, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Thanks, everyone, for joining us. As Amanda said, today we're going to be talking about women photographers. The name of the series is Through Her Eyes. This is the second part of an installation. We're going to talk about some of America's most well-known and influential female photographers from the 1800s on. The work is impressive on its own, but even more so when you think of the biases that created barriers to entry for these artists, which is going to come up in some of the conversations that we have. Cindy is going to talk about our first piece, Immigrant Mother by Dorothy Elaine. Take it away, Cindy.
Thank you for that great introduction, Tana. So we're looking at Migrant Mother, Napomo, California. And this photograph was done by the artist Dorothy Elaine. This was actually, the picture was taken in 1936, but the copy that the DIA has in their collection was printed in 1974, I believe. There were, on the day that Dorothy Elaine took this photograph, she took 7. And of those 7, 5 of them included this family. And this is the most close up of those 5. So the subject here is a woman by the name of Florence Owens Thompson. And at 17 years of age, she got married. And by the time she was 32, she had 7 children. Unfortunately, while she was pregnant with her 6th child, her husband succumbed to tuberculosis and died. So with a very rudimentary education, and because it was, at the height of the Depression, she didn't really have opportunities to find good work. So she ended up becoming a migrant farm worker, and she worked in the fields to support her children. She's shown right here in the backdrop is a small lean-to, kind of just a makeshift sort of a lodging. One side of it was completely open, could barely keep, them dry. And she had driven to a pea farm to pick peas. And while she was there, the weather caused a frost that destroyed the whole crop. So unfortunately for her, she landed here and her car broke down and there were no peas to pick. So she ended up having to sell the tires off of her car in order to feed her children. The artist, or maybe I'll step back for a second here and I'll ask Tana. Tana, what do you notice in this black and white photograph?
There we go. I notice that the children are looking away, and then I also notice that the primary subject's brow is furrowed, so the intense expression in her eyes.
Well, Florence Owens Thompson was actually almost 100% Native American. I think her father was Cherokee and her mother claimed to be Choctaw. So, gosh, she's only 32 years of age, and if you look at her face, it's so weathered, and she looks so much older. She's had a hard life up to this point. In this photograph, and I remember the very first time I saw it when we were in our DIA docent training, They said there were 3 children, and for some reason I couldn't make out the baby's face. If you notice at the lower right, and if Kathleen, if you could point that out with the cursor, she's holding a baby in her arms, and you can just barely make out its face. It's so abstracted that it's kind of hard to see. And then she has the other 2 children turning away, almost as if to protect their identity from the photographer. So let's talk a little bit about Dorothy Elaine. She was from San Francisco, and she was making her living originally as a portrait photographer. But as time went on, and during the Great Depression, she moved toward doing photojournalism. And so she was traveling through the Southwest, and her idea was to capture and create a more human portrait of the folks that were being impacted so greatly by the Depression out in the Dust Bowl. So she is best known for these Depression era works, and she was commissioned to do them by the Farm Security Administration. So she was documenting, as I said, rural poverty, the exploitation of not only these migrant farm workers, but also of sharecroppers. And through her photojournalism, she was able to bring the plight of these poor, forgotten people to public attention. So the story goes that she had visited this farm camp, and when she returned back to San Francisco, she told the editor of the San Francisco newspaper that she was working for about, the conditions. And 2 of the photos from this original 7 were published. And as a result of the publication and, the immense distribution of the newspaper, the government finally reacted and stepped in to help these folks avoid starvation. So 20,000 pounds of food was shipped into Nepoma. However, by the time it arrived there, poor Florence Thompson had already left with her children, so she wasn't able to benefit from this. So as I said, there were 7 photos taken. 5 of them include this family. This is the last and the most close-up of the 3. It's such an intimate moment. And when you look at this woman, there's shame to her circumstances. I can tell you that later on in life, her circumstances improved. She actually ended up bearing 10 children. She had 1 more partner, and then she married later on in life. And her children, late in her life, actually bought her a home. And she wasn't comfortable living in the home. She'd always lived sort of in a mobile home or a trailer. And so even though they bought her this lovely home, she went back to living in her trailer because that was where she was the most comfortable. I think a couple of her daughters are still living today. If you're interested, in seeing more of her work, I can tell you that she also documented Japanese internment camps in California. Those photographs are unavailable because they were seized by the U.S. Army and they were never printed. However, if you want to know more about her, there's a great PBS documentary about her entitled Dorothy Elaine, Grab a Hunk of Lightning. And it's in the American Masters program. So if you'd like to know a little bit more about her, she's on PBS. It's said that Lang grew frustrated with her own work because she didn't feel like it always provoked the change in society that she was looking for. She wanted to correct the injustices that she had documented. However, we know now that her photography has endured, greatly influenced others, and she was certainly a pioneer in the medium of photography, not only breaking the barrier as a woman photographer, but also in being one of the first photojournalists. And with that, I will go to Christine and ask if we have any questions from our audience. Oh, and here's, sorry, I forgot to tell you about, here's a beautiful portrait of Dorothy Elaine. Her career was pretty long. I think she lived to be about 70. So she was probably taking photographs for, about 50 years. So she has a prolific body of work.
She sure does. Thanks, Cindy. And this is a great photograph. Just imagine her sitting on the top of her car and probably I think about how heavy that camera must have been.
Well, that's something that we probably should make a point of talking about. The first cameras were called big box cameras, and they were made out of wood, and they were super heavy, and they had glass plates that were quite large and heavy. So it was almost an obstacle for women to get involved with photography. But as time went on, and the technology improved, you can see she's got a handheld camera here, and the film was then processed within a film laboratory, or maybe by the artists themselves. So it kind of opened a door for women to embrace photography, and cameras weren't that expensive. So the obstacle of the original, really giant cameras and all the labor that went with them, once that was gone, then women were able to become more involved.
Yeah, so the progression of the technology of cameras from the 1800s to this period, which was probably the 1930s, made cameras not only more affordable, but less heavy. So, yeah, we had one comment. One of the attendees said that that Dorothy Elaine photograph almost looks like a lithograph.
Yeah, it's kind of got a grainy texture, and you have to remember that these photographers not only utilized their artistic technique and creativity in the composition of how they were going to take the photograph, but later on, when they were in a development lab, they could actually work with the emulsions to change the contrast of the photograph and make it look a little bit more grainy.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Nice job, Cindy. Nice job.
Thanks, Tana.
Yeah. Now, the piece that we're looking at is Letter to the World by Barbara Morgan. She lived from 1900 to 1992. And the subject of this piece is Martha Graham. Some of you have probably heard of her. She was a very, very famous dancer, and some would call the mother of the modern dance movement. This photograph is considered by many to be the most famous photo ever taken of an American dancer. And it depicts Martha Graham in her ballet, Letter to the World. Letter to the World was the name of the ballet. And this photograph ranks in honor with Ansel Adams' photographs of Yosemite and Walker Evans' small town churches. So it's part of the DIA collection, but like most of these photographs, they're not out very often because the medium is super fragile, so it has to be taken away from the light and stored frequently. The artist, Barbara Morgan, worked in several media, including printmaking, drawing, and watercolor, and by the mid-30s, she was concentrating on photography, partly because photography was easier to do with two small children at home. And in the summers, she traveled to the American Southwest and turned her camera to the landscape. Those landscapes were incredibly inspiring for her. And it was there that she met another woman who was also incredibly inspired by those landscapes, and that was the dancer and choreographer Martha Graham. And in addition to their mutual love of the land, they found that they had many other things in common, and they formed a beautiful friendship that lasted for 60 years. They were both dedicated modernists, and hence at the time in America, they were considered bohemians, and they were both highly idealistic, given to pronouncements on the spirit and the essence and things that now, well, at least that were maybe commonly known as New Age. So at some point, Morgan proposed to Graham that they do a book of photographs on choreography, and Graham agreed. That's how we have the piece before us. And Graham said that it was not an easy project at all. Morgan was a perfectionist. Graham's words actually were that she was a terror. She worked Graham tirelessly in an effort to show that her dance was deeper than ego and that the dance had a spiritual energy. And you can see that captured in the movement, in the kind of ethereal, way that the fabric flows, and the just using the black and white, other photographers have said, was their choice because it removes, in removing the color, you're making the work seem more distant from reality, and therefore more magical. So Morgan went beyond capturing Graham to show the historical and social import of the emerging modern dance movement. Morgan celebrated dance, and this was pioneering, because at that time dance was an art form that was looked down on, and like women are often looked down on. She wanted to elevate and change ideas about art and women. The ballet in and of itself, Letter to the World, is about Emily Dickinson, and some of you probably know that Emily Dickinson was a famous poet. She spent her life shut up in her family's home in Amherst, and even though she was isolated from the world and something of a hermit, her poetry shows that even in her isolation, she was able to experience every important notion and emotion known to humankind. And the ballet was interspersed with Dickinson's poetry. Does anyone have any questions, Christine?
No, not at this time, Tana, but that sure is a gorgeous photograph of Martha Graham, isn't it?
Yes, I almost feel bad talking over it. I just want to let the viewers have their time to enjoy that amazing piece. I see
And
we also have...
Yeah, the photograph of the photographer is here.
Yeah, with her big heavy machine. Look at those forearms. Great way to work out.
Absolutely.
Cindy, they are incredibly heavy. So if there's no other questions, we can move on to our next piece. King and Queen of Citizens Dance. I think, Cindy, you're going to cover that one for us.
Yeah, I'm up next, but I'm still thinking about the position that Martha Graham is in when that photograph was taken.
Oh.
I'm wondering how old she was when she was able to move that way, because her body was just incredibly flexible. I wonder how old she was. Anyway, now we're going to talk about two folks who definitely aren't young in this, the subjects of this photograph. As Tana said, it's the King and Queen of a Senior Citizens Dance. This photograph was done by Diane Arbus, and she was probably one of the most, I guess we could use the word distinctive artists of the early 20th century in terms of photography. She originally trained in fashion photography alongside her husband, and his name was Alan Arbus. He was an actor and a fashion photographer. And they were published in magazines like Vogue. But, as her career moved on, she sort of started this series of the subject matter in these photographs. The subjects of these portraits were offbeat people, unusual, sometimes, very dark themes and moods that when you look at them, they're almost disturbing. And she became known for photographs of this type. She would wander the streets of New York City where she lived to photograph people that she saw on the street, in parks, she even went to morgues at times to photograph people who were there to, identify bodies. I mean, so very, very dark themes. She spent time, visiting seedy hotels. She was always looking for that like lifting the carpet on the, darker side of life, or the people who are sort of maligned, and that, often people walk right past and don't even notice. So she kind of wanted to document that side of life. She was known for going to great lengths to get exactly the composition that she wanted in terms of cropping the photo. This photo is only about 16 by 16. And, because it's in this square format, it almost reminds us of a snapshot. And it gives it kind of more of a raw quality. She was published in other magazines at the time, like Esquire. So this was 1970. So about 10 years before this, she was really very well known, famous, participating in shows at, the museums in New York City. And she was very well received. Unfortunately, she struggled with depression through most of her life, and she ended up taking her own life 1 year after this photograph was taken. Also, unfortunately, in that year after this photo was taken, she became the first American photographer to have her work displayed at the Venice Biennale, which is a very, very prestigious exhibition to be a part of. I want to talk a little bit more about the two folks. So we do know their identities. Her name is Jetta Granoff. She was 72 when this photo was taken. And his name is Charles Farr. He was age 79. And she came upon them at a senior citizens dance and photographed them. And it's interesting that she's the queen and he's the king because the two of them had never met before. So, here they are, king and queen, joined together forever in this photograph, and yet they had never met before. Christine, do we have any questions about Diane Arbus?
We do not, but many people will probably relate to Diane Arbus through her husband and his work on the series MASH.
Yes, thank you for interjecting that. I forgot about that. Yes, he was an actor on MASH. And here's Diane. She was a petite. She pronounced her name Diane. In our circles we usually say Diane, but she pronounced it Diane. But she was this petite woman, and I think sometimes her stature kind of allowed her more entree into some of these folks' lives because she was, non-threatening, and having a camera between you and the person kind of is a superficial sort of obstacle that provides a little more intimacy. So I think, her stature and the fact that she was a very petite woman probably made her less threatening to her subjects. And with that, I think we will be going back to Tana. I'll hand it back to Tana.
Thanks. There was a question about dance. Someone asked why dance was looked down on. And that question made me think, I'm not sure. But when I was preparing for the first installment, I recall reading that photography was easier for women to get into than painting because there was kind of a hierarchy of the arts, and painting was seen to be at the top of the hierarchy. It was male dominated. And I suspect that people viewed painting as being more capable of communicating intellectual ideas and ideas that were of greater value, beginning from historic religious representations of stories from the Bible to just historic and I'm not sure, but Christine, you might be able to weigh in on that. Why dance was looked down on?
Well, in the 1800s, if we think back to France and our dance exhibition, we had the can-can dancers and, women who were considered kind of on the outer edge of respectability doing the dancing. So, that seems to be historically, where it came from. And it took a while for dance to become recognized as a respectable art form.
Nice answer. Thank you for that answer. I didn't mean to delay us, but I just thought it was a great question. I knew I wasn't going to be able to give the answer that Christine would. So anyway, what we're looking at right now is Imogen and Twinka at Yosemite by Judy Dater. The photograph was taken in 1974, and it features an elderly Imogen Cunningham, one of America's first female photographers, and she's encountering a nymph in the woods at Yosemite, and the nymph is the model Twinka Thiebaud. I'm probably not saying that name correctly. This photograph is Dater's most famous photograph, And it came about because she was teaching a workshop and Imogen was also there. And she was showing people how to use her 4x5. And in the workshop, she was exploring the idea of voyeurism at its starkest, which is where you have a closed person looking at someone who is nude. And the photograph was super famous. It was published in Life magazine in its 1976 issue about the first 200 years of American women in photography. It's a double portrait. Each woman is separated by lines on the tree. And the photograph itself is a reaction against Thomas Hart Benton's painting of Persephone in 1939. And in Benton's painting, you had a nude nymph who was lying down. It kind of played with, oh gosh, what's the word? Perspective, because it looks like she's lying down on a tree, but the tree doesn't look like it's dead. It looks like it's standing. At any rate, around the corner of the tree, you have a man who's fully clothed, kind of leering or peeking and looking at her. So he's sneaking a stare around the tree. And Dater has said that the idea of voyeurism is a significant idea of photography. And she kind of inverts it a little bit in this because you have voyeurism giving way to an equal exchange of gazes between age and youth, human and possible nymph. Dater has said that this piece touches a chord in people, but she feels like this piece gets in the way of her other work. It's her signature piece, and it gets more attention than other pieces that she thinks are equally worthy of consideration. She says that this piece just kind of took on a life of its own. And she is one of the photographers who worked in black and white photography because she said that it was more graphic, and it was very graphic and a little more subtle than color. She was the one who says that it removes the image one step away from reality, and she likes the mystery. So a little bit about the artist herself. She was born in California in 1941. She grew up in Los Angeles and became an ardent feminist. Her father owned a movie theater, so movies became the prism through which she viewed the world, and they had a profound influence on her photography. You can see there's a lot of dramatic flair here, and she says that she was always directing her subjects. So there's a lot of emotion in Twinka, and that was directed. The poses were very directed. She studied art at UCLA from 1959 to 1962 before moving to San Francisco in 1963, where she got her bachelor's and master's degrees from San Francisco State University. And it was at San Francisco State University where she first studied photography. In 1964, she met the photographer Imogen Cunningham at a workshop focusing on the life of Edward Weston. Dater was inspired by Cunningham's life and work, and they shared an interest in portraiture and remained friends until Cunningham's death in 1976. 3 years after Cunningham's death, Dater published Imogene Cunningham, a portrait containing interviews with many of Cunningham's photographic contemporaries, friends, and family, along with photographs of both Dater and Cunningham. Dater is also known for her feminist self-portraits, and she often creates characters that embody the conscious and unconscious concerns that women have. And here, I would say that the embodiment or the concerns embodied here are aging. You know, women are valued by many in society based on their youth. Youth is beauty. And so here we have a commentary on that. Dater now lives in Berkeley, California. Her career has been long and varied, combining teaching, creating books, traveling abroad, conducting workshops, making prints, videos, photographing continually. A very prolific woman. Does anyone have any questions? Christine, are there any questions?
No, there aren't any questions right now, but there's a photo of her. I was going to say, do we have a portrait of her? And here it is right here. Thank you.
Beautiful woman. Okay, if there are no questions, Cindy, I will pass the mic back to you. Oh, no, I lied. I am going to keep the mic because
I'm passing it right back to you, Tana.
Like a hot potato. Okay. So what we are looking at here is a photographic series, I guess, by actually series isn't. It's a collection, 4-piece coiffure. It was produced in 1991 by Lorna Simpson. The image L to R, back of a woman's head, is you have left to right, you have the back of a woman's head, you have a braided coif, you have the back of an African mask, and then beneath that you have text. And I hope everyone can see that text. I would have a hard time reading it for you. There you go, bigger piece. Braid into 4 circles, part into 8 sections from the crown. Each section is twisted anti-clockwise. Braids meander over entire head, starting just behind the ears. Tips of each strand are connected until they form a circle. Over hand, under hand, whichever you prefer. A hairpiece is attached to the crown. A section of hair is parted and held firmly between left thumb and forefinger. I cannot see, transverse braid from a series. That could be an eye exam test, and I would fail that last line, I'm not sure. But Simpson often pairs image with text, and her texts are kind of like poems in and of themselves. This piece is, some say the fact that the woman's back is to the viewer, is a comment on absence or negation of self. And Simpson does that a lot in her work, which she's probably doing to show, or some would opine that she is doing, to show that we humans don't see the whole person when we look at each other. We're conditioned to see each other in bits and pieces, the pieces that society attaches value to, negative or positive. The text, as you heard, is about braiding hair associated with Black women, and the text in and of itself is open to interpretation. Because the identity of the sitters are unknown, you only know them by the hair or the mask that they wear. Even the identity of the mask is obscured. And the whole piece here is calling into question the amount of emphasis that Black people put on hair and hair texture, and our internalization of Western standards of beauty. It brings up the question of how and whether we judge people by the hair. Black folks, white folks, Americans judge people by the hair and these Western standards of beauty. And it's timely because in the last few years, I know I've seen in the headlines instances where kids are expelled, Black kids are expelled from school because the kids are wearing their hair natural as opposed to straightening it, which is something that we did all the time back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. I've been doing it for years to try to fit in to mainstream society. And we've also seen in headlines that Black folks have been subjected to disciplinary actions at work because we're wearing our hair natural instead of straightening it. It's a big thing, hair and internalized racism. The linkage between how Black people approach hair and internalized racism is a big thing in the Black African American community. And this piece tackles it beautifully. The The artist was born in Brooklyn. She attended the High School of Art and Design and the School of Visual Arts in New York and the University of California, Berkeley. There you go. Look at her with her beautiful natural hair. And while the pictures may seem straightforward, the text will often confront the viewer with the underlying racism found in American culture. Not necessarily in this case, maybe, I'm not sure. She was the first Black woman to participate in the Venice Biennale. She does not portray herself in her work. However, she's quoted as saying that she does think that maybe there are elements to her work and moments in her work that derive from her own personal experience. But ultimately, that isn't as important as what the work is trying to say about either the way we interpret experience or the way we interpret things about identity. Her works often portray Black women combined with text to express contemporary society's relationship with race, ethnicity, and sex. Cindy, any thoughts? What did you see when you looked at that piece?
You know, Tana, it makes me think about how the relationship to hair going through even my lifetime has, not only been important in social justice type means of late, but, I was in high school in the 70s, and back then, the battle was always with young men coming in with really long hair, and they would be disciplined and sent home. And then it makes me think about the next artist that we're going to be talking about. She's from the Middle East, from Iran. And of course, their hair, the relationship to hair goes even beyond what we're talking about, because women aren't even allowed to show their hair. It has to be completely covered. So it's interesting that there's this very intense relationship with hair that affects all different, cultures and strata of society. I mean, I can't really understand why we have so much importance tied up in the way someone decides to wear their hair or not. So moving on to the next image, after Lorna Simpson's beautiful work. This is Untitled, and this is by an artist by the name of Shirin Neshat. She's an Iranian American, and she grew up in Iran. I think she was born in the middle 50s, and she grew up during a time of the reign of the Shah of Iran. So it was when they called Tehran the Paris of the Middle East. It was a very economically upbeat time and, progressive time. And it was pre the Islamic Revolution, which, she left Iran to escape. So once the Islamic Revolution took place, freedoms that women had been enjoying were, taken away, and they once again, had to have themselves completely covered, weren't allowed to the freedoms that they had gained in terms of education or being able to drive. All of those things were upended. So she started her career in photography, but she moved into other mediums like many of these other artists have. And she became very well known for video and movie making. And she's what we call a conceptual artist. So she comes up with the idea, but she has a lot of people who work with her and help her create her works of art. So this particular print was in an exhibition that the DIA hosted in 2013, and it was Shirin Neshat, a retrospective. And some of us happened to be around during that time, and were, lucky enough to see this absolutely beautiful imagery dealing with very difficult subject matter. And Tana mentioned earlier women's conscious and unconscious concerns. Well, this retrospective definitely dealt with very conscious concerns of women, at this time. So this was a gigantic print. It was about 6 feet wide and about 4 feet tall. And when you walked into the gallery, it just was so impactful when you saw it because of its size and because of the subject matter. We see these two hands grasping one another. We don't know if it's the same person's hands. It looks like it might be a woman's hand and a man's hand because there's a lot of hair on the wrist of the left hand. And it looks as if both of these hands have been tattooed with henna in, the Middle East or Indian tradition. Actually, her process for creating the prints that were in this show was that they would take the photograph, and then after the photograph was printed, they would create the addition of the tattoos. So they weren't actually on the people's hands or on the model's hands when the photograph was taken. So some of the things that were in this show came from her Woman of Allah series, which dealt with, the Islamic Revolution. And she sometimes in some of these photographs, she would integrate imagery from mass media and kind of overlay it with Islamic art. And some of the photographs that were in this exhibition really were disturbing because it showed women who were in the traditional dress of Iran, and they might be holding a machine gun. So it was very, not only disturbing, but it was just, it stunned you when you looked, at it. She's very well known for movies. Some of the movies that she's created, the titles are Women Without Men, The Rapture, Passage, Illusions in Mirrors. Some of these, are available on YouTube or are available in other ways. One of the interesting things was she tried to go back to visit her parents. I think she was in the United States for about 10 years. So from 1974 until like 1984. So she went back to visit her parents. And because of complications that were related to the revolution, she was held captive on her visit to Iran, and she never actually got to see her parents. So it's interesting that we're talking about this photograph today because all of these kinds of concerns are in the forefront for us in our news, every day. At any rate, take a look at some of her other work. Her photographs are very, they definitely engender curiosity, and they make you think about social justice and injustice in this world. So this is a photograph of Shirin. She actually came to the DIA during the exhibition, and she did a lecture and an interview in our DIA lecture hall. So it was wonderful to be able to actually, meet her, to be able to meet the artists that created these types of works. And with that, Christine, I will ask if we have any questions about Shirin Nishat.
We don't, but we have a big thank you for providing this virtual experience, and there's a lot of depth in these photographs. So it's really something to think about.
And with that, I'll hand it back to Tana, I believe. Oh, no, sorry. These are a little bit out of order. So Tana and we're just going to work with what we've got here. So this is a kitchen table series, and this is by an artist by the name of Carrie Mae Weems. And I did a little bit of studying about her. I'm very interested in her. We had an exhibition at the DIA a few years back called 30 Americans, where she was featured. She is considered to be one of the most influential African-American artists of the 20th century. The kitchen table series, you can see it's 2003. I'm going to make sure I get this right. It's comprised of 20 photographs, and then alongside of the photographs there are 14 text panels, which make me think of, I'm sorry I said Lorna Thompson before, it was Lorna Simpson, kind of in the same mode as Lorna, where she includes text with her works of art. So Carrie Mae Weems, she created this series to kind of highlight the life of an African-American contemporary woman. So it's the story of a woman's life, and it's conducted in the space of her kitchen. And Carrie Mae Weems plays the starring role in this contemporary fable. So there are 4 topics in the fable. If we can move ahead, I think we might have a couple more. Yes. So some of the photographs deal with the love relationship between a man and a woman. Some of them deal with a woman seeking the counsel of her friends, which you can kind of see on the left there. Some deal with a woman's role as a mother, which you see on the right. And then toward the end of the series, it deals with a woman coping with living all alone. So it's like the cathartic moment when your children have left the nest and you're like, oh, what now? What will my life be now going forward? She began each day setting up her camera in front of her kitchen table and would take these photographs. You know, she took many of them, and then we have 20 that ended up in the series. So the DIA is fortunate to have in our permanent collection the entire 20 photographs along with the 14 text panels. The only other museum in the United States that has the whole series is the Cleveland Museum of Art. So we're quite fortunate that we are one of two. She was born in 1953, so she's kind of in the same age bracket as Shirin Neshat and some of the other photographers that we've been looking at. She grew up in Portland, but she now resides in New York, and she works in many mediums besides photography. She works with text, textiles, audio digital images, on-site installations, and video. Her art themes investigate things like relationships, as we can see here, cultural identity, sexism, class, political constructs, and the consequences of power. And I'm pretty sure that the works of art that she exhibited in Our 30 Americans, those dealt with the consequences of power. They were very, very powerful photographs of enslaved peoples from, you know, like around the mid 1800s. She has been a recipient of the prestigious MacArthur Genius Fellowship, and I'm pretty sure that's probably not only one of the most prestigious awards that an artist can be singled out for, but I think they might get $1 million along with this award. So it's a financial, you know, boom. The original exhibition of this series is considered to be a seminal moment in art. I'm reading that because that's probably not a word I would usually use, but it influenced, more importantly, it influenced an entire generation of artists. And that group of artists were African-American artists who rarely saw themselves reflected on museum walls. So you can see she had a huge impact. You know, we were talking about how photography as a medium created impact in terms of being, I guess, sort of a medium that could be easily grasped by female artists. But I like to think about how, as a photographer, this woman, the impact of her work upon photography is amazing. And, you know, so far we've been looking at pretty much all black and white photographs, which, as Tana said, you know, when you take the color away from a photograph, the imagery becomes the focus, and you almost aren't distracted by the color. And it takes maybe some of the beauty away from the entire composition. It's more stark. So anyway, you know, black and white in the kitchen and the story of a woman's life at her kitchen table. Do we have any questions? Christine?
No, we have a comment that the viewer would love to have see these it in a large scale. And oh, thank you, Amanda, or Kathleen. That's Kathleen doing that. Thanks, Kathleen. And the one thing that that I wanted to note is we don't often get to see this terrific series. It's a box series, and it spends most of its time in the dark in the photography department in conservation, because our photographic works are prone to deterioration if they receive too much light. So these pieces are seldom on view. I've only seen them once. In over 10 years, I've seen them once.
I've only seen them once in 15 years. So you're right. They don't come out too often, and it's a special treat when they do.
Absolutely. Yep. Thank you.
The next one is you too, Cindy.
Oh, I guess I'm gonna maybe finish up here at the end. Our only color photograph, and this is of William, and there is a reason why this was printed in color, and I'm gonna get to that. So William was a young neighborhood kid, and he was the son of a friend of the artist, Corine Vermeulen. Corine was Dutch, but she came to the United States on a scholarship to Cranbrook. When she completed her academics, she returned to the Netherlands, but still felt that draw to Detroit and ended up coming back here and settling here. the reason that this is in color, you can see that William's got this beautiful head of red, flaming red hair. And for her, he represents a change of mindset, that anything is possible going forward with our new generations. She sees our future being a hybrid future. And, you know, by looking at this picture of William, we can see that it's happening in Detroit right now. So William, our multiracial, beautiful little toddler, is a symbol of the future, a way forward, where thinking for Corinne Vermeulen is not black or white, but both. In Detroit, while she was in Detroit, she met a lot of people who she described as very warm and hospitable, and that was part of the reason why she decided to make her permanent home here. She began documenting the city with her camera, and at the time that she was taking her most famous photographs, as we know them, there was a lot of misinformation about Detroit, including images and stories in the media of things we call ruin porn, you know, the degradation of neighborhoods and the destruction of buildings and decay. And that was sort of, you know, the theme of most of the photography that was taking place at the time. So I think she was kind of trying to reverse that a little bit. So she said, and I quote, "My work is a reaction against the portrayal of Detroit as an empty place." She saw Detroit as a place full of hope. And it's said that her camera allowed her to silently observe. She didn't have to react to the subjects. And if we can move forward, I think the next one is another one by, yes. So the title of this is Sweater. You can see this was done 3 years earlier than the one that we were just looking at. Again, this is a color photograph. And both of these photographs were printed in a large format. They were 30 inches across, and 30 inches high and about 22.5 inches wide. So this was taken, this picture of this sheep, whose name is Sweater, was taken at the former Catherine Ferguson Academy in Detroit. And that was a school, unfortunately now closed. It was for pregnant teens and teen mothers. At Ferguson, the idea was to teach these young women life skills, how to care for their unborn children and themselves by taking care of and practicing animal husbandry. So once the babies were born, Ferguson also provided an on-site daycare so the girls could continue to go to school, get their high school diploma, and learn how to care for their children. All the while, you know, they could have their babies nearby, close, so that they could see them throughout the day. So Sweater was just one of the many animals at the farm, but she kind of became the symbol of the farm's success. While they cared for Sweater, the girls learned how to shear her wool. They wove it into yarn, and then they used the yarn to create clothing that they would wear or sell at Eastern Market. So it was, you know, from the start to the finish, you know, how a garment of wool could, you know, come from an animal like Sweater. In addition to Sweater, the farm had an apiary. They raised bees, chickens, goats, and dairy cows. And they also had a large vegetable garden. So not only did the girls farm, but they would also take the farmed products, as I said, to Eastern Market in Detroit and sell them. And hopefully, you know, all of this combined together showed them the importance of hard work while caring for not only the earth, but for one another. So her photographs really show hope for a city, hope for our city. And I think we might have a photograph of her after Sweater. Yes, there's Corinne Vermeulen. Christine, at this time, do we have any questions?
We just have one comment that next time when we have this talk, one of the viewers would like to see all 20 photographs of Carrie Mae Weems, since they're so seldom on view.
Me too. I would too. Raise your hand if you want to see all 20.
I do.
Yeah. So at this time, we've come to the close of our talk today, and Tana and I would like to thank all of you for spending, you know, an hour with us. We want to thank our producers, Chris Mark, Amanda Harrison, and Kathleen McBroom, who was manning the presentation. Thank you, Kathleen. And we want to invite you to visit the DIA. It's open Wednesday through Friday, 9 to 4. On Wednesdays from 9 to 12, it's for members only. So from 12 to 4, it's for anyone. Saturdays, we're open Saturday and Sunday, we're open from 10 to 5. Remember, we're closed on Monday and Tuesday. I even forgot this myself. I drove down to the DIA with my grandson and it was closed. I was used to it being closed on Monday, but not Tuesday. So just remember, don't drive down on a Monday or Tuesday. In order to visit the DIA, we still require advanced reservations. So you have to reserve a timed entry ticket. Just go on to dia.org and it'll take you right to the spot where you can reserve a time. Our exhibitions that are currently on view are Detroit Style. That's through January 9th, 2022. It's been extended. A very popular exhibition on cars produced in Detroit, I think from 1950 through 1975. Just a few days from now, we'll be opening the exhibition Ofrendas, and that will go until November 7th. And then we are looking forward to an exhibition, a photographic exhibition, Black is Beautiful, that will open on October 8th. That'll go through January 16th. So at the close, I would just like to reiterate what Tana said. You know, we were looking at all of these female photographers and we were talking about how they use photography, not just as a medium for creating a beautiful image, but they went far beyond that and used it as a way to illustrate social injustice, illustrate female, concerns with their own cultural identity and their place in the world. So all of these photographs that we showed you today had a very powerful meaning behind just a beautiful photograph. Next Thursday, please join us at 1 o'clock for DIA Trivia with our host, Ian Rapnicki. So thanks, everyone. I hope you enjoyed our presentation today. I really enjoyed working with Tana. This was our first time as a team. Hopefully we'll get to work together again in the future. Thanks, everyone.
Feelings mutual. Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful weekend.